My name is Jonathan Auerbach. I'm a PhD student in Columbia University's Department of Statistics. I'm going to talk about quotas in the New York City Police Department. So I'd like to thank the organizers for holding StanCon and allowing me to present twice, last year and again this year. I'm going to talk today about a project I did quantifying the extent to which the police department quotas in New York influence the behavior of police officers. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I hope to motivate the policy problem and give a brief overview of the proposed approach. And so all details of the analysis are in our markdown file. This is a work in progress, so I appreciate any suggestions or criticisms. So the New York City Police Department, or NYPD, is frequently accused of using quotas or mandatory minimums to hold police officers accountable and maintain productivity. In other words, critics charge the NYPD with pressuring officers to make a predetermined number of arrests and issue a predetermined number of tickets in order to receive a satisfactory evaluation. So this slide, I'm not going to go through these, but this slide contains a sequence of relevant headlines that have happened since 2010. Kind of goes on and on. Regardless of your personal opinion of law enforcement practices, quotas are illegal under Section 215A of New York State labor law. And despite what a lot of people think in New York, the quota ban wasn't merely a labor concession like tenure or pensions. When the first version of the ban was adopted in 1978, the bill's memorandum stated specifically that it sought to protect the driving public from distracted officers and substandard policing. Of note, the assembly version of the bill was introduced by Chuck Schumer, who at the time was a state assemblyman. And they wrote that the establishment of a ticket quota is declared to be contrary of public interest. Police officers, as well as the public, need not be put under the pressure of a mandatory ticket quota. Such a policy can only hurt the effectiveness of the police officer in the performance of his other duties, while he must give the driving public a rash of summonses to meet the quota. So while quotas are illegal, there's this semantics debate of what practices really constitute a quota. So the NYPD's position is they deny relying on quotas, and there's no evidence of a department-wide mandatory minimum. What the department does do is they instruct supervisors to set productivity targets and to base evaluations loosely on those targets. So most recently, the NYPD command issued Operation Order 52, which, as written, orders NYPD supervisors to set performance goals. And then reviews take place each week, which these reviews divide a month into 4 review periods. And at the end of the month, officers are rated as effective or ineffective. So what happens in practice is that performance goals are generally relative. Officers are evaluated relative to peers. And so what happens is low-performing officers are rated, who are rated ineffective, are encouraged to increase productivity, and you get this ticket race. And since supervisors control the pace of the race, they kind of control the minimum number required by employees to be considered effective. And you get this de facto quota system. This all kind of came to a head in 2013. I don't know if you guys knew about, there was this court ruling on the legality of stop and frisk, which is a controversial practice in New York City. What happened was that the judge of the court case kind of pointed out that when these evaluations are turning into de facto quotas because officers feel like they have to raise productivity to compensate for past behavior before their final evaluation at the end of the month. And so the judge wrote, it is difficult to see any difference between a performance goal and a quota if performance goals operate as the deputy commissioner who testified said. And she pointed out that it's not surprising that since 2010, there have been at least 9 grievances filed by police officers against the NYPD alleging adverse employment actions as a result of quotas. So while this is important, the testimony is certainly important and the revelation is important, this opinion is, the opinion was based on other expert witnesses as well, but they don't really quantify, they're not data, can't quantify the extent to which individual officers alter their behavior to coincide with departmental targets. The potential for widespread behavior doesn't imply that behavior is actually widespread. So to me, this means that data is necessary to determine the extent of quota-driven police behavior. So we want to use, specifically we have traffic ticket data, and we want to use the traffic ticket data in order to reveal the extent of quota-driven policing. And so we're going to use two types of data sets. We have every summons for a traffic violation issued by NYPD officers. That includes both moving and parking violations. And we have the timestamp and the ID of the issuing officer. And then we want to compare it to some type of baseline. In this case, we're going to use traffic collisions reports, the NYPD. The idea is this kind of serves as a measure of ticketable behavior. If there are more cars on the roads, or people are driving more dangerously, you'd expect more crashes. These are also timestamped. There's other things you could use as a baseline. There's data on complaints about violations of the traffic law. But you people, as you would expect, don't really call in complaining about, call into the NYPD complaining about driving. That crashes kind of seem like the most unbiased estimate of ticketable behavior. And this presentation here is going to be limited to Police Precinct 81 between the years for the years 2014 and 2015. So if you look at the data, here we have, if you divide the month into two halves, the first two periods constitute the first half, and the second two periods constitute the end of the month, after which the police officers are given a rating of effective or ineffective. You see that the average number of tickets, the y-axis, the average daily number of tickets written between 2014 and 2015 increases by about 6%. And if you were to compare that to the average daily number of collisions, there's virtually no increase. It's less than 1%. If you don't look at the average over the day, but you look at the total number over the entire period, you see a much larger increase. And if you divide the increase into two groups, tickets written by officers who are writing less than the median, and tickets written by officers who write more than the median, you see that officers who are writing more than the median don't really change their ticketing behavior over the two periods. That it's entirely driven by officers who are writing below the median. But it ends up being a kind of a weird comparison because months have unequal number of days. So really there's more days in the second half of the month than the first half of the month. And so in order to be keeping your ticket writing constant, you're actually writing less tickets. So you actually see that it's officers who are above the median each period who are decreasing their ticketing rate, and it's officers below the median who are decreasing it but not as much. So there's this kind of complicated relationship about how officers write tickets. Trying to infer it from, this gives you a sense that these periods matter, but you can't, it's dangerous to infer from aggregates down to individual officers, and that kind of motivates the need for a model. And I think a Bayesian model is ideal here because most officers write very little tickets, and so the information that you want to base your evaluation on is spread amongst many individuals who contribute relatively little data. And so you're going to want to partially pool. So this is a histogram of the number of tickets written per officer. The y-axis is on the log scale. You can see that most officers write 0 or 1 tickets, or less than 5 tickets per day, with a few officers writing more than 25 or 30 tickets per day. And you can tell that as heavy tails because when you take the log, you get this kind of linear type. You get the histogram looks kind of linear. And so the model we're going to do is we're going to try to decompose the log ticketing rate additively. Into the red, here's a baseline, and then you're going to have individual effects, a day of the week effect, a period effect, a month effect. I'll go through all the effects in a second. One of the things I just want to point out is that there are many deviations to baseline that aren't accounted for in the model that probably in a future version should be. I don't know if you remember, but if you look at the end of 2014, so in the middle of the graph, you look at the log ticketing behavior, there's this huge decline, and there was a slowdown. I don't know if you guys were reading, if anyone's here from New York City, there was a huge police slowdown, and you actually see an increase in baseline, that the baseline in the number of ticketable offenses implied by crashes goes up, yet the number of tickets being written goes down. So the actual model looks like this. The likelihood has 2 components. The YOD stands for the daily number of traffic tickets per day per officer, and the ZD is going to refer to the daily number of traffic collisions. And so the daily number of traffic collisions doesn't enter directly into the linear part of the likelihood that's modeling the number of traffic tickets. They just share a common parameter. And then we're going to explain traffic tickets according to these individual effects. There's going to be an officer effect, a day of the week effect, a period effect, an hour. It says hour effect. It's actually a holiday effect. That's miswritten. A month effect, and then this baseline. I described the model more carefully in the R Markdown file. And then there's priors. I defend the priors in the R Markdown file. So what I want to do, I guess I have a few minutes left. I want to get to the results. I actually just noticed, well, before I came up here, another mistake. This is the individual officer effects, a histogram of the individual officer effects. It is actually on the log scale. It says e to the parameter. So it's a log linear model. So these are the parameters are interpreted as percent changes in the outcome. So this shouldn't say e to the beta officer, just say beta officer. But what you can do is you can see clustering. You can see on to the extreme on the histogram, you can see there are a few officers who write a huge amount of tickets. E to the 4 is something like 50. They're writing 50 tickets per day. And then you see near zero kind of two clusters. People, if zero is like the average, is like the median person, you see a cluster of people right above the median, a cluster of people below the median. And then there's a bunch of interesting things in the model that you can pull out. For example, if you look at the day of the week effects, by taking out the baseline, the management practices of the NYPD become very clear. So for here you see that there's a higher ticketing rate on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday and Friday. By the way, these are posterior intervals for the parameters. There's a Monday effect, Tuesday effect, Wednesday effect, and they're inner 50 and 95% intervals. And so the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday refer to alternate side parking rules. That's when most of the moving violations are parking violations are written. And very few parking violations are written on Saturday and Sunday. There's a lot of things you can look at the posterior. I think the most important thing is once you look at the period effects, I guess you don't have, quote, statistical significance. You can't really tell a difference between any of the periods. I think the reason for that is because they were not entered in a way that was consistent with what we know about how officers are ticketed. Holiday effects, I'll skip over that. So the solution was to change the model, and instead of putting in a period effect, random period effect, was to put in a variable that measures the relative position of an officer in the prior period to the one in which they're writing tickets. So the notation is kind of silly here, but RP0, comma, P minus 1 is just the relative position of the officer in the previous period. Someone raising their hand?
Yeah, sorry, quick question. I really missed this, but
yeah.
There are two kind of cops. One that just writes, the kind of the traffic cops that write the tickets and they walk around.
Yeah, so this is officers. So not meter maids or the traffic. Yeah, sorry, I should have been clear about that. There's about 35,000 officers with badges that can arrest you, and then there are people who are just going around. So the officer's job is to protect and serve and create safety, and I think what's happening is they have the ability to write summons and tickets, and what supervisors they're saying, hey, you were out all day, you didn't write one ticket, and the officer can say, well, I took someone to the hospital, I intervened and was able to handle a problem without an arrest, and everyone's better off now, the victim's sorry, the perpetrator's sorry. And after a while, if you keep using that excuse, your supervisor's going to say, bullshit, I think you're doing nothing. I think you're sitting around all day. And that's what a lot of most of these officers aren't out, or the goal isn't to just go out and write tickets like meter maids. The goal is to protect and serve in the course of that write tickets. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, just officers. So what we're doing is we're going to enter in, instead of a period effect, we're going to look at the relative position in the ticket race of the officer relative to their peers, relative to the median. And since we don't know the functional form, we're going to have to approximate it. Here I approximate it with a spline. And so if you look at it now, the function kind of looks like this. On the x-axis, you have how many tickets you are from the median. So if you're at 0, you wrote the median number of tickets in the previous period. If you're 2.5, you wrote 2.5 tickets more than the median, 2.5 less. And you see this decreasing behavior, that officers who write 3 tickets under the median increase their productivity by as much as 20%. And if you're below the median, you're decreasing it by as much as 75%. Or you're writing 75% of the average ticketing rate. That's it. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Anyone have any more questions?
It's big. I mean, so there's 77 precincts in New York City. Is that stat? Oh, sorry. It's big. Precincts? Yeah, I mean, I assume that there's, if I was an officer, I assume, and I had to have a productivity target, I would look for locations that I'm sure I know that I can get those targets. There are a lot of tickets and a lot of days. A lot of officers, a lot of tickets, a lot of days. So I mean, obviously, there's a lot of dependence in the model that you're not capturing, and it's, it's an approximation. But I don't think it's going to be not enough data to estimate these parameters.
I had a question. In the great talk, by the way, that was really cool. Thank you for sharing all your work with us, and I can tell you spent a lot of energy and work on this. The question I had was about the collisions model. Why did that not have the same covariates as the police officer ticketing model?
So the point of the kind of double Poisson thing was you could put collisions directly into the linear part of the ticketing model, but the purpose of the Poisson thing was to kind of smooth it. So say one day there's 80 crashes, which, I mean, there wasn't, but say there was. That could be, the mean parameter is unlikely to be 80. That's likely to be a large realization. So you only want the mean parameter to be in not the particulars of the day. So it was a way of smoothing.
All right, thank you, Jonathan.